He said, I am thoroughly tickled. You just don't do that.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video. Today, we're going to be looking at a video good old Harman Smith put out where he tries to flex on the fact that Tears of the Kingdom is coming out before The Elder Scrolls 6. There are reasons for that, but let's not let reality get in the way of Harman's fantasies. Anyway, same procedure as usual, we're skipping past Harman doxing himself and promoting his crappy fanfiction. So, take it away, Harman.
With Tears of the Kingdom launching in just, 3 months, a little bit over 3 months, we are going to see the release of the highly anticipated sequel of one of the best games of all time, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Okay, Harman, let me stop you right there. Breath of the Wild was a good game, but was it the best game of all time? Or at least one of the best games of all time? No, and we need to stop stating as such. Now, don't get it twisted. Breath of the Wild absolutely has the potential to be one of those games that can rightfully claim that title, but does it deserve it? No, and I say that as someone who really likes Breath of the Wild. It's like they focus so much on the shrines and the physics of the game that they completely forgot about the rest of the game, or even outright neglected some parts of it. I know Bill of Good Old Days Gaming feels the same way. How about you, audience? Sorry, I rambled on there for a minute to give my 2 cents on Breath of the Wild and claiming game of all time status, but so please continue, Harman.
And boy, am I excited. You know, I have my copy of Breath of the Wild sitting right in front of me. I think I'm going to fire it up right before I go to bed tonight. But I have, been a big fan of Breath of the Wild since it came out. It's become one of my favorite Zelda games. I really love and appreciate this game.
Well, I mean, no kidding, Harman. It's a Nintendo game. Nintendo could poop in a bag and write Super Mario Brothers, The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, Star Fox, Fire Emblem, Pikmin, Advance Wars, or whatever, and you would still be saying that that bag of poop was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
And a lot of fans really got it into their hands.
You mean heads, Harman. Fans got it into their heads.
That this big, expansive sequel to Breath of the Wild was taking too long in development, and that it had some kind of development trouble, and that there was something wrong with it. And as of this recording, we actually haven't seen any footage yet. Any new trailers in a long while. However,
okay, so I haven't exactly been keeping up with the articles written on Tears of the Kingdom's development cycle, but I've been looking up and down online like there's no tomorrow. However, from what I saw, there was only one topic thread about that matter on GameFAQs.com. Everywhere else on Google I had looked through didn't mention a single thing about Tears of the Kingdom taking too long. Also, if we haven't seen the footage yet, then how do you know it's going to be big and expansive? For all you know, it could be the exact same world as Breath of the Wild. It might be a different land than Breath of the Wild's was, but I doubt it. Anyway, of course a game that's as large as Breath of the Wild's was is going to take at least 5 years. If this game took 6 years, then that means that they're going to take everything that was bad about Breath of the Wild, weapon durability, and for me at least the lack of towns, and make what was good about Breath of the Wild even better in Tears of the Kingdom.
It's interesting to note the double standard. It's interesting to note that Skyrim, The Elder Scrolls 6 came out in 2011.
The Elder Scrolls 5, Harman. Skyrim was the 5th Elder Scrolls game, not the 6th. The 6th is in development right now as we speak, but Skyrim is the 5th one. I know counting is hard for you, Harman, but come on now, my baby doll guy. Learn basic numbers, dude.
6 years before Breath of the Wild, and not only that, there is no word of Skyrim 2.
Never in the history of the Elder Scrolls series has there been a direct sequel to any of the Elder Scrolls games, Harman. There has never been an Arena 2, and for good reason. There has never been a Daggerfall 2. Play Daggerfall Unity instead. There has never been a Morrowind 2. So many mods to play for this one, including a frickin' Star Wars mod. There has never been an Oblivion 2, my favorite Elder Scrolls game so far due to the AI, and there isn't going to be a Skyrim 2. Released too much, 10 out of 10. The Elder Scrolls 6 will take place in another province of Tamriel, almost guaranteed, or maybe somewhere else on Nirn entirely. For those of you not in the know, Nirn is the world that Tamriel is a continent on. Maybe it'll be set in Atmora, or maybe even Akavir, who knows? Harman sure as shoot doesn't. Also, Harman, the development of The Elder Scrolls 6 was postponed to work on Starfield. In addition to that, Bethesda just released Hi-Fi Rush not that long ago. They are not in any real hurry to release many games after that, especially not when you factor in that Todd Howard said that he wants The Elder Scrolls 6 to be played for a decade straight, and the development got pushed back for Starfield. Oh, I can't wait to see that game's bugs and glitches in action. The Elder Scrolls 6's, that is, not Starfield's.
You're right. Like, the Elder Scrolls 6 Skyrim 2 is nowhere to be found. Okay, like, Todd hasn't talked about it. They showed off a logo on screen once. You know, they've done this and they've done that. Like, we know it exists. Like, we always knew it was going to exist. Obviously, Skyrim was going to get a sequel. But, like, as of right now, Skyrim is nowhere to be seen. Nintendo is putting out a sequel to Breath of the Wild, one of their biggest games ever, before Bethesda could even get their sequel off the ground, in spite of having a 6-year head start. Breath of the Wild was built to accommodate people who were impressed by Skyrim's open world and wondered why Zelda couldn't be more like that. And yet, Nintendo took what Bethesda did and made it better in less than 6 years.
Not quite, Harman. I'll readily admit that the combat of Breath of the Wild is better than any of the Elder Scrolls games. I'll give you that one. Side with you on it, but one, Bethesda's working on Starfield right now, and Todd Howard said that the Elder Scrolls 6 won't be released until after Starfield releases, and Bethesda is trying to do something that's different enough as it is with Starfield, as I understand it. 2, the Elder Scrolls 6 is not going to be called Skyrim 2. Where did people dig that name up from? Seriously, did the people who come up with it never play any of the earlier Elder Scrolls games? It's starting to drive me bonkers. 3, Skyrim can be seen everywhere, Harman. Bethesda has been releasing the blasted game with the same coat of paint, for the most part, for the past 11 years. Can you seriously imagine being the game company that releases the same game 11 years in a row? 4, that 6-year head start was spent mostly on developing Starfield. Personally, I wish they would have been working on the Elder Scrolls 6 first myself. 5, calm down, Harman, they're just video games. 6, the whole reason Nintendo made Breath of the Wild the way they did was, according to Eiji Aonuma, to rethink the conventions of Zelda. Harman, do you never do research, buddy? It takes no more than 5 minutes. Okay, it takes longer than that, but it's still worth it to do when you make a video like yours, because otherwise, Harman, it's just gonna fall flat.
Nintendo would put out a completely reinvented Zelda in less time than it's taken them to for Bethesda to put out a sequel to the game that influenced Nintendo, right? It has taken forever. And with Starfield looking the way it is, the poor man's No Man's Sky, that's embarrassing to say. Even No Man's Sky seems to have had more hype than Starfield at this point. With Starfield looking the way it is, how exactly is Bethesda going to remain the powerhouse going forward? They put out Fallout 4, that was a disaster.
Let's review what you just said there about Fallout 4, Harman. It won Best Game at BAFTA, Game Critics Award, and 2015 Best at E3. Furthermore, on Steam it has a very positive rating, and Metacritic says it gets generally favorable reviews. Now in Harman's defense, the game does have its bugs and glitches, but what game doesn't? Anyways, Harman, you want to try that one again?
They've done this. They've done the Doom games were terrible. They bungled Wolfenstein. They've done all this stuff, and it just, the company has clearly gone downhill in recent years.
Yes, and that is because of Fallout 76 and how crappily Bethesda handled it and the Elder Scrolls Blades. The problem is, before these games, Bethesda stuck to their guns and didn't follow industry trends for the most part. They had kept doing what they had been doing for years, just making fun, if unfathomably buggy and glitchy games. But they were still fun, and you get to mod them, what's not to like? Also, and for me at least, they're one of the few RPGs out there where you get to play as anthropomorphic animals, namely lizards and cats, and no, I don't consider myself to be a scaly or a furry. Anyway, it wasn't until Steam suggested that mod creators get paid for their mods, and while that did eventually fall through, thank goodness, Bethesda still had plans to go through with it, unfortunately. The rest has been described better by others, so I'll let them do it, as it's pretty darn depressing for me.
And most people just don't want to admit that it's true. Most people don't want to admit that, like, Bethesda just has fallen off in recent years and will not be able to compete with Nintendo going forward.
Bethesda has never, as far as I'm aware, competed with Nintendo. Another thing is that nobody has said that Bethesda isn't falling off. We didn't realize it for the longest time, but thanks to the disaster piece that was Fallout 76, we very quickly learned that Bethesda was much worse off than we thought.
Right? Not only is Breath of the Wild bigger and better than the Elder Scrolls, it has a much bigger brand name. You know, like, you would be surprised at how, like, Breath of the Wild has sold about the same amount of units as Skyrim. You know, despite Skyrim being, like, a phenomenon when it came out and like having a 6-year head start, Zelda has, like, a way longer legacy, is way more recognizable. People can tell you more about the characters and the world and the games a lot more than Skyrim. And, like, the games are just better as well as on top of that. Like, people actually go back and play Ocarina as opposed to, like, Daggerfall or Morrowind or whatever.
Harman, I promise you, Skyrim outsold Breath of the Wild by around about 3 million units, I believe? When you factor in all of Skyrim's re-releases anyways. Furthermore, the reason people can tell you more about the Zelda characters is because, for the most part, most of the Zelda characters get reused over and over again. One thing I noticed is that Harman says that Breath of the Wild is bigger and better, and again, not quite. Breath of the Wild does have a bigger world, but it sure pays the price when you factor in that all of the dungeons are gone, replaced instead by 4 mechanical beasts with the same way to complete them, activating all the terminals in the beast. And you also have 120 shrines with a different gimmick. Also, while I love Ocarina of Time to absolute death, its world is, to me at least, the most boring out of all the Zelda games. And I say that as a huge Ocarina of Time fan. All the interesting stuff happens in literally the far corners of the game world. Hyrule Field is empty with only a few grottos here and there, and the side characters like Saria play a role in the game's story, but we don't really remember them that well now, do we? Also, if more people go back and play Zelda as opposed to Daggerfall and Morrowind, and to be honest, I'm surprised you even knew about those games, especially Daggerfall. But Harman, how would you know how many people go back and play Ocarina of Time when compared to Daggerfall and Morrowind? If you can somehow know that, then you must be psychic. So could you please send me tomorrow's winning lottery ticket numbers?
Like, it feels very much like these things like a king over and right now, just like using you know, like, I think we're gonna see some crazy stuff in Tears of the Kingdom when we finally see those trailers. Like, the fact that people are, like, complaining about the open world being reused.
Now, I side with Harman on Tears of the Kingdom. It's almost certainly going to do some pretty crazy stuff when it releases, and I look forward to it. I'm sure loads of people do. Now, as for reusing the map, Eiji Aonuma apparently confirmed it, but then there's really nothing wrong with reusing a game's map in a new game. The Grand Theft Auto games did it years ago. GTA 3's map was reused in GTA Liberty City Stories, and GTA Vice City's map was reused in GTA Vice City Stories. Now, to be fair, the prequel games added a few touches and altered the maps of each game's world, but only slightly. They were the same, but at the same time, things had to be different, as the stories games take place a few short years before the events of the sequel games, if that makes sense.
I am just extraordinarily curious just why there aren't more people, like, questioning where Skyrim 2 is.
Because Bethesda has been focusing its efforts more towards Starfield, you doofus. Why do you think? Also, for at least the 3rd time in this video, Harman, it's not Skyrim 2, it's the Elder Scrolls 6. Sorry for repeating that over and over again, folks, but it grates on my nerves something fierce when someone says Skyrim 2. Is that normal? Am I the only one who feels that way?
Like, where is all the skepticism and the rage regarding Skyrim 2? Like, all I ever see is that, like, oh man, it's gonna take a full decade to play through this game. It's gonna be like Todd is just doing his typical routine. Like, there hasn't been anything concrete on the game at all. Meanwhile, with Tears of the Kingdom, we have a hard release date, like, not all that long from now. You know, like, how exactly is Bethesda or any other fantasy open world RPG creator for that matter, supposed to compete with this? You know, Elden Ring was a flash in the pan that isn't going to like pan out well at all. I expect Armored Core 6 to be a bomb, by the way.
I do hope you all heard that. Elden Ring was a flash in the pan. Excuse you, Harman? Elden Ring, last I checked, won Game of the Year in addition to 120 plus other awards at the Game Awards. Or maybe not the Game Awards, but it did in fact win over 120 awards. People are still playing it a year after release, and it's still being sold on store shelves. About the only thing that I don't like about Elden Ring is the fact that it's way too hard for the Switch to handle, and that breaks my heart. But hey, Steam Deck is a thing.
How exactly are these other inferior companies meant to compete with Nintendo? It just isn't going to happen. You know, it's just going to fall flat on their face, and they're just going to do, you know, they're going to have to resort to just doing the same thing that they've always been doing, is just like overpromise and underdeliver, you know. And meanwhile, Nintendo is just pumping out banger after banger, and not just in the Zelda franchise. You know, you have the Marios, you have the Fire Emblems, you have the Animal Crossings, you have like, you know, Splatoons, like these Pokemon. Like, these franchises are ginormous, but nobody likes to acknowledge or admit it. You know, people are still pretending that ARMS failed, for example, when that actually did better than any new fighting game IP. And
none of these so-called inferior companies are trying to compete with Nintendo necessarily, Harman. If anything, it's the other way around. You see, Nintendo does lateral thinking with withered technology, and while their own games are fun, they pay the price for it with hardware power. Seriously, it isn't Bethesda Softworks in the Elder Scrolls 6 that Nintendo needs to be scared of. It's From Software and Elden Ring. They also have to compete with the Steam Deck, at least according to you, even when Gabe Newell said that the Steam Deck isn't meant to compete with the Switch. As for the whole overcompromise and underdeliver, he's not totally wrong. I remember Todd saying that snow would build on trees, and if too much snow was on a tree branch, it would cause the tree branch to drop it all onto the ground or collapse under the weight of that snow that had built up. But Harman, if you want to know of someone who overpromised on a game and then that game underdelivered, look no further than the Fable games. Peter Molyneux sure loved to run his mouth on that one. Also, while those games are good, how many of them exactly have won Game of the Year? I'm not saying that they're bad at all, but how many of them won Game of the Year? They're ginormous, but for two of those game series, they are either extremely rare releases or they have gone seriously downhill in recent years. The two game series of Nintendo's that I'm talking about are Pokemon and Animal Crossing. In Pokemon's case, ever since Pokemon X and Y, that series has just gone downhill significantly, at least for me. For proof of that, though, look no further than Pokemon Sword and Shield and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. As for Animal Crossing, while they're one of my go-to games to help with my mental health, I could honestly say the only one I've ever remotely come close to finishing, let alone actually quote-unquote finish, would be New Horizons. Now, I say finish, but I mean, in New Horizons' case, invite KK Slider to the island to get the credits to roll. Also, Fire Emblem has almost died twice now. First, after the release of the Binding Blade, then again after New Mystery of the Emblem. The Blazing Blade and Awakening both stepped in to save the Fire Emblem series, thank God. But don't act like Fire Emblem, or any other Nintendo IP for that matter, can't just die. As for Mario, the only Mario game that I've been unable to finish is Super Mario 3D World, because of having to find all those green stars. Looking for stuff like that just to beat a game is draining to me. If I want to play a Mario game and be forced to look for secrets, then I'll just play Super Mario World ROM hacks, thanks. One last thing I'd like to note is that Nintendo is actually trying to convince third parties to develop for them, and if they're not, then they need to start. Nintendo's games are good, absolutely. Some of the best. But even the almighty Nintendo has to have third-party support on their systems, otherwise their systems won't sell, except to the hardcore Nintendo fanboys. Having said that, that same exact thing goes for Sony and Microsoft too.
Ever, I would say. Like, ARMS is just did fantastically well, and nobody wants to admit it, you know. And like, it's far from the biggest game Nintendo has to offer, you know. Like, there's just so much we can expect to see going forward that when that Nintendo Direct finally drops, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. there's so much we can expect to see from Tears of the Kingdom, but what I will tell you is what I 100% expect to not see, we are not going to see Skyrim 2 news. We are not going to see like a new trailer of Starfield that suddenly makes me go out and buy it. We're not going to see like anything really interesting or new or fun from these other developers. They're just going to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. Forspoken, was the first big release of the year and it completely bombed. Okay, it was a complete disaster. Dead Space remake. A lot of people are hyping that up, but like it's just a remake of a mediocre horror game from like the mid 2000s. Nobody cares. Last year we had a number of bombs. Stuff like the Callisto Protocol and like Babylon's Fall, like Final Fantasy Strangers of Paradise. Like there's all these things that are just culminating in the same thing. Like all these companies are converging on the single point. But the reality is that like none of these companies, none of them can compete with what Nintendo is doing. None of them are producing their own hardware. None of them have a multitude of first-party IPs that they develop internally that sell like over 10 million units that can be pumped out like every couple of years. None of them have like,
Oh dearie me, Harman. Did your sodium chloride levels get over 9,000 again? Anyway, let's see. First of all, of course, you're not going to see Skyrim 2 at the Nintendo Direct, Harman. Precisely because there is no Skyrim 2. It's the Elder Scrolls 6. We don't know which province it's going to take place in yet. Probably Hammerfell or High Rock if I had to guess. Probably Hammerfell because High Rock is where Daggerfall takes place, the second Elder Scrolls game. And that's before we get into the fact that no matter which province the Elder Scrolls 6 takes place in, it won't be appearing on Nintendo's hardware, that's for sure. And it sucks the big one, man. At least to me. As for doing the same thing over and over and over again, neither you nor anyone else has any room to be saying that others are doing the exact same thing over and over and over again, because Nintendo has been doing exactly that for over 20 years. Most game companies have. They may put their own unique spin on things, the developers on the games, that is, but at the end of the day, pretty much all game companies wind up repeating their games after a while. I wouldn't exactly say Forspoken bombed, it could have done better, but it could have done worse, from what I've been able to gather. And what's wrong with remaking Dead Space, Harman? Nintendo has been remaking their games ever since the Super Nintendo days with Super Mario All-Stars, and let's not start on Nintendo doing that with Pokemon.
A brand as strong as Nintendo's. None of them have like the ability to like innovate and do new things. They haven't done that in years. All they've been doing is coasting off games, IPs, franchises that they established in the mid-90s on Nintendo hardware. That is absolutely pathetic. That is absurd. Bethesda hasn't done anything of value in decades. Okay, Skyrim was pure shit. Okay, I hated that game when it came out, hated how everyone obsessed over it, hated how they like attacked Skyward Sword, the last great Zelda game of my childhood.
Can you taste it yet, folks? Can you taste the salt yet? Breath of the Wild stomped all over Skyrim. In terms of combat gameplay, heck yes, I will happily and readily admit that Breath of the Wild's combat beats out Skyrim's, and I love Skyrim. But Harman, one thing Skyrim did in terms of combat far better than Breath of the Wild is that Skyrim's equipment, namely your weapons, don't break when the slightest breeze blows. Seriously, to quote Jim Sterling, it's no wonder Hyrule has a Ganon problem. The weapons are made out of cardboard and held together by spider webs. It also doesn't help that they are Twizzlers in disguise. Also, Bethesda never worked with Nintendo after the Home Alone/NES games. The first Elder Scrolls game to ever get released on a Nintendo console was Skyrim, and that was 6 years after its original release. Also, Bethesda hasn't done anything of value? They own some of the game industry's best-selling titles. They are the ones who basically reinvented the Ultima games into something much more palatable and fun. They're the world's third largest privately owned game company, although they're owned by Microsoft now. Yeah, keep telling yourself the sweet little lies, Harman. Also, Harman, you say Skyward Sword was the last great game of your childhood, so how old are you? You cannot be younger than I am. You are around my age. You have to be.
I love Skyward Sword. And to see it like put down in favor of like, hyping up this open world game, no. Absolutely disgusting. Skyward Sword was great. Breath of the Wild stomped all over Skyrim. And it will be remembered, I think, as like the Bethesda killer, I would say. Like this was the game in which like Nintendo really, really proved that they're better than Bethesda, that they're better than Xbox, that they're better than PlayStation, better than Skyrim, better than Horizon Zero Dawn. Nothing that these companies threw out against it could even put a dent in what they were doing with Breath of the Wild. And that trend is absolutely going to continue with Tears of the Kingdom on March 12th, 2023. I cannot wait to see it.
Harman? A quick Google search on both games' reviews proves that Skyrim is liked more than Skyward Sword, not by a huge amount admittedly, but Skyrim is still liked more, which is further proven when you see exactly how many times Bethesda has re-released Skyrim over and over and over again. And Breath of the Wild is tied with Skyrim for overall review score at 4.8. So both games are very well liked. I mean, naturally, they're both great games. And look, Harman, you don't have to like the Elder Scrolls games. Nobody's going to point a gun at your head and tell you you have to. And admittedly, Skyrim has been overdone at this point. But don't act like the Elder Scrolls games aren't fun, Chief. I would say play Breath of the Wild for more engaging gameplay, but play the Elder Scrolls, or Skyrim, if you want better storytelling. As for Horizon Zero Dawn, it was really well liked, and only slightly less than Skyrim and Breath of the Wild. With that, we have come to the end of Harman's video, which means we have come to the end of my video, so I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now!